Hey, welcome back. Gleekon here again. We got another episode coming at you of Lore of Warcraft. Stay a while and listen to Chapter 9. Um, so we've recently passed about the 1/3 mark of this book. They stopped that initial big Burning Legion advance, and they've kind of forced the Burning Legion to regroup, and now we're going to see where it goes from here. Manaroth bent before the black portal, his stocky front legs in a kneeling position and his wide leathery wings folded tight behind him. The tusked demon tried to make himself as small as possible, for he now communed with Sargeras, who seemed not at all in a pleasant mood.
The way is not yet open to me.
Oops, I changed my audio settings. I like this one.
I had expected better. We struggle,
Manaroth admitted.
but the task, it's almost as if the world itself seeks to prevent your coming, Great One. I will not be denied. No, Great One.
There was silence for a time, then the voice in Manaroth's head said,
There is a disruption, a wrongness. There are those who should not be, but are, and those who seek to awake what should not be awoken.
The massive demon did not pretend to understand, but he still replied,
Yes, Sargeras. They are the key. They must be hunted. Archimond is in the field, and the Houndmaster is long on the trail. The transgressors will be brought to ground.
The sinister-looking gap fluctuated, squirming as if alive. Manaroth could feel the Lord of the Legion's desire to make his way into this rich world. The frustration Sargeras radiated chilled even his hardened lieutenant.
One must be brought whole, so that I may have the pleasure of tearing him asunder, slowly and delicately.
An image materialized full-blown in Manaroth's mind, an insignificant creature of the same race as the Highborn. He was younger, though, and wore, in comparison to his fellows, rather drab garments of green and brown. The vision the demon had of him showed the night elf in the palace itself. Manaroth recognized the chamber where the original portal had been created, a place now only a windswept ruin.
Mark him well. I have already, Great One. Archimond, Hakar, and I all watch for his presence. One of us will snare him.
Too much. Manaroth's voice is too much for me.
Alive,
commanded the presence from beyond, now beginning to recede from Manaroth's head.
Alive, so that I might have my pleasure with his torture.
And as Sargeras vanished, Manaroth shuddered, knowing full well what fate this Malfurion would face once the Great Wood had him in his grasp. The monumental task of reorganizing the host was made more so by the countless refugees accompanying them, but to his credit, Lord Ravencrest did as best as possible. He took an accounting of all supplies, especially food and water, and distributed accordingly. Some of the high-ranking among the refugees protested at not receiving what they thought their rightful and more bountiful shares, but one black glare from the bearded commander silenced all. Tyrande and the sisters also did what they could for the soldiers and civilians. Her helmet pushed back, the priestess of Elune led along a lightsaber she had borrowed earlier as she stopped to speak with one person after another. All, whether old or young, of high caste or low, welcomed her presence. Perhaps it was just the moment, but they appeared to her especially comforted after she was through. Tyrande did not mark this as the result of any special gift she had, merely assuming that her gentle demeanor was an extreme relief in contrast to all else the others had faced of late. A small figure crouched by herself seized the priestess's attention. A young female, 2 or 3 years away from being able to enter into the service of Elune, sat in miserable silence, staring at nothing. Kneeling at her side, Tyrande touched her shoulder. The girl started, turning to glare at her like a wild beast. Be at peace, Tyrande said soothingly, handing her a water sack. She waited until the girl had finished, then added, I am from the temple. What's your name? After a moment's hesitation, the child answered, Chandra's Feathermoon. Ah, that's another famous one. I believe that's the one here in Shadowlands that helps hunt her down. So she's like her number 2. Where is your family? I don't know. Are you from Suramar? The priestess could not recall her, but that did not mean that Chandras was not from the same city. No. Arahinam. Drana tried to hide her concern. Chandras was one of the refugees that the demons had been pursuing when they had set their trap. Based on what the priestess had gathered from other survivors, many people had perished before the Burning Legion had allowed the rest to escape. The child's family might still live, but then again it might not. When did you last see them? Chandra's eyes grew huge. I was with a friend. When the monsters came, I tried to run home, but someone grabbed me, told me I had to run the other way. I did. She put her hands to her face, the tears spilling over them. I should have gone home. I should have gone home. The tragic tale was not what Tyrande had wanted to hear. The priestess would make inquiries wherever she could, but she was near certain that no one in Chandra's immediate family had survived, and that the girl was now all by herself in the world. Has anyone taken care of you since your flight? No. The refugees from Arahanam, a smaller settlement, had been on the run for 2 days prior to meeting up with the host. It was remarkable to think that Chandras had survived on her own even for that period. Many older night elves had fallen to the side. The priestess's people were not in general up to such strife. Night elves, while hardly weak, were very ill prepared for life outside their cushioned world, a failing only now becoming evident. Tyrande gave thanks to Elune that she, Malfurion, and Illidan had been raised differently, but they were in the minority. This time my audio noise is my son background playing some Lego villains. There were so many in the same situation Chandra suffered, but something about the child especially touched the priestess. Perhaps it was that she somewhat resembled Tyrande in face and form at that age. Whatever the case, the sister bade the child to rise. I want you to climb atop the Night Saber. You're going to come with me. It went against her orders, but the priestess did not care. Though she could not save everyone, she would do what she could for Chandras. Her face drawn, but her eyes for the first time clear, Chandras mounted the cat. Tyrande made certain that she was secure, then led the Night Saber on. Where are we going? The child asked. I've more work to do. You'll find some dried fruit in the pouch hanging on the left side. Some quithpa. Chandras eagerly twisted to the pouch, rummaging through it until she discovered the simple fare. Tyrande made no mention of the fact that the girl was also devouring her ration. The sisterhood trained its members to learn to survive at times with minimal sustenance. There were even 4 periods of ritual fasting each year, done in general as a sign of dedication to the goddess. Now it paid off in time of war. Moving on to the next refugees, Tyrande continued her ministrations. Most were simply exhausted beyond belief, but some had injuries. The latter she always tried to help as much as possible, praying to the Mother Moon for the strength and guidance necessary. To her joy, the goddess saw fit this day to grant success in all her efforts. But then she came upon one infected injury that shocked her. Whether an intentional wound or an accident, it was at first difficult to say. Tyrande studied the unsettling greenish pus around it and wondered at the peculiar cuts. The victim, an older male, lay pale and unconscious, his breath coming in rapid gasps. His mate, her hair bound back with what remained of a ruby and emerald-encrusted brooch, cradled his head. How did he do this? Asked Tyrande, not certain if she could even slow the course of the infection. There was something disquieting about it. He did not. It was done to him. I don't understand. The elder female's expression tightened as she fought to maintain her calm long enough to explain. This thing, he said it looked like a wolf or hound, but twisted as if out of a horrible dream. Oh, I guess Tyrande hasn't encountered the fell beast yet. Tyrande shivered. She knew that the other female spoke of a fell beast. The 4-legged demons had nearly slain Malfurion more than once. They especially desired those who wielded any sort of magic, draining it from the bodies and leaving only a dry husk. He made it all the way from Arahanam like this. The priestess marveled that anyone could survive so long with so hideous a wound. No, from there we escaped whole. Bitterness tinged her words. This he got but 2 days ago while sneaking off to find us food. 2 days? That would have put them with the mass of bodies flowing toward Mount Hyjal, but none of the demons had managed to break ahead of the horde, and of that Tyrande was certain. You swear that it was only 2 days. It happened near here. Back in the wooded lands, now again to our south. I swear it. The priestess bit her lip. Woods that were behind the night elven lines. Leaning over the wound, Tyrande said, Let me see what can be done. She forced herself to touch it, hoping that she could at least prevent it from spreading. From behind her, she heard Chandra's gasp. The girl feared for her, and rightly so. One never knew what a demon-caused wound might do. The Burning Legion would not be averse to spreading plague. The moon was not present in the sky, but that did not concern Tyrande. While the priestesses were strongest when it was visible, they were fully aware that it was never far away. Their link to Elune was powerful no matter what time of day or night or even cycle. Mother Moon, hear my entreaties, she whispered. Grant this humble one the cool, soothing powers of your touch. Guide my hands to the source of this abomination, and let me remove the taint so that this innocent may recover. Tyrande began humming under her breath, a way of focusing her will into her work. The injuries that she had healed for Broxigar paled in comparison to what she attempted now. It took all her control just to keep from feeling that she would fail. Without warning, a pale, silvery light shone around her fingers. The victim's mate stared wide-eyed, and again Chandra's gasped. Tyrande's hopes rose. Once again, Elune was responding to her. Truly the goddess was with her this day. The healer traced her fingers around the wound, taking special care where the foulness was worst. Tyrande could not help but grimace as she touched the pus-ridden areas. What sort of evil were the demons that their very biter's scratch left such horror in its wake? As her fingertips went past the ravaged areas, the injury grew less horrific in appearance. The pustules shriveled, finally disappearing. The bloody crevice narrowed at each end as if slowly sealing itself. Encouraged, Tyrande continued praying to Elune. The infection shrank to a small oval patch, while the wound itself became a scar, first fresh, then nearly gone. The male suddenly groaned as if awakening from a deep sleep, but Tyrande did not stop. She could not presume that the disappearance of outer signs meant that the wound had completely healed inside. There would be poisons from the infection in the victim's blood. Several tense seconds later, when the male's chest finally rose and sank at a more sedate rate, and his eyes fluttered open, the priestess knew that she had defeated the demon's work. With a long exhalation, Tyrande leaned back and gave thanks to Elune. The goddess had granted her a miracle. The female reached forward and took one of Tyrande's hands. Thank you, sister, thank you. I am merely the vessel for the work of the Mother Moon. If there is one to thank, it is Elune. Nevertheless, both the stricken male, Carius, and his mate continued to express their gratitude for what they saw as the priestess's heroic effort. Tyrande nearly had to fend them off, so thankful were they. You can repay me by telling me in more detail what occurred, she finally told the former victim. Nodding, Carius related the story as much as he could recall. In the midst of their troubles, the two had realized that they needed food. However, the chaos at the time prevented them from finding anyone among the refugees who had enough to share. Most had fled with only as much as they could carry in their arms. Spotting an area of forest he thought might contain berries and fresh water, Carius had left his mate with the promise that he would return shortly. Desperation made him attempt the foolhardy hunt at all, for surely others had stripped the forest of anything edible long before. Carius had been forced to go deeper into the woods than he had intended. He began to worry that he might never find his mate again, although she had told him that she would stay behind if he was gone too long. When at last he discovered a bush with ripe purple berries, Carius had quickly tried to fill the pouch on his belt, allowing himself an occasional berry to eat immediately so as to preserve his strength. But just as he had filled the pouch, he heard something huge rummaging through the forest. His first thought was that it might be a tauren or a bear. He had started back, his gaze constantly over his shoulder so that whatever emerged would not catch him by surprise. And so it was that he was looking in the wrong direction when the beast charged him from the front. Having once served Blackrock Hold, Carius still had some swiftness left to him despite the debilitating journey. He twisted around just as the monster, some sort of demonic hound with two horrific tentacles sprouting from its upper back, had tried to fall upon him. The beast did not seize his throat as it had intended, but instead clamped down on the leg. Somehow Carius had managed not to scream, although every fiber of his being had demanded it. Instead, the night elf grabbed for something, anything with which to defend himself. His groping hand found a thick-pointed rock, and he swung it with all his might against the creature's nose. He heard something crack. A harsh whine filled his ears, and the beast released his leg. Even then, Carius doubted that he would have escaped the demon, but from somewhere in the distance a sharp sound had suddenly echoed. The hideous hound's reaction to it had been both instantaneous and astonishing. It cringed first, then immediately leapt toward the source of the noise. Self-preservation urged Carius to immediately drag himself in the opposite direction. He had not even paused to bind the wound, which at that time had only been bloody. The mauled night elf had struggled all the way back to his waiting mate, each harsh step of the journey expecting the creature to return to finish him. Tyrande digested his tale with a great sense of foreboding. Carius had indeed been very fortunate to survive an encounter with a fell beast. What that abomination had been doing behind the lines, however, worried her. Of course, one such beast, while dangerous, could be readily dealt with by Malfurion or the wizards, but what if there were more? That in mind, she asked, "You mentioned a sound that drew it away. What sort of sound?" Carius thought for a moment before responding. "It was a sharp, cracking sound, like thunder. Nay, it reminded me of the crack of a whip, I'd say." The priestess rose to her feet. "I thank you for your patience. If you will forgive me, I must be on my way." "Nay," protested the female, "'tis we who thank you again, sister. I thought to lose him." Tyrande did not have time to argue any more. She gave both the blessing of the temple, then quickly went to where Chandras watched her with eyes as wide as plates. "You healed him completely. I thought he would be dead before you could start." "As did I," Tyrande returned, mounting behind the child. "The Mother Moon was generous to me. I've never seen a priestess heal a wound so horrible, and that monster made it." "Hush, Chandras, I must think." The priestess took command of the Nightsaber, turning the cat toward where she last recalled seeing the spellcasters. In her role as cleric, Tyrande often obtained information that even Lord Ravencrest's strategists never picked up. Now once again, she had heard something that Malfurion and Croesus needed to know. The Legion's assassins were closing in on them. Yeah, it sounds like a car. The black dragons returned under cover of night to their vast lair. Neltharion had been eager to come home, for there was much to be done. His plan was so near to fruition that he could taste it. A smaller male atop a peak resembling an upraised talon dipped his head in homage. The Earth Warder paid him no mind, his thoughts too caught up in the moment. He landed in the mouth of the flight's main cavern and immediately turned to his consorts, who dropped behind him. Deeper within the cavern, the roars of other dragons could be heard.
"I go below. I must not be disturbed."
The females nodded, having heard this command from him oft before. They did not ask what the aspect did down there. Like all in the Black Flight, they existed to obey. Every creature in the mountain was touched to some degree by the same madness that affected Neltharion most of all. The huge black maneuvered through tunnels that barely allowed his immense form passage. As he descended deeper, the sounds of dragon life vanished, and a new odd noise echoed over and over. To any who listened, it most resembled what one might note in a blacksmith's shop, for there could be heard repeated hammering on metal. The hammering went on without end, and as it increased in tempo, Neltharion's savage smile grew wider, more satisfied. Yes, everything was coming to pass. But the dragon did not head to the source of the hammering. Instead, he turned at a side passage and continued his descent. After a time, the hammering faded away, leaving only Neltharion's heavy breathing to echo in the dark corridors. No one but he was allowed to walk these lower chambers. At last the Earth Warder reached the vast chamber where he had cast his spell upon the Eridar. Yet as he entered, the dragon's head picked up, for he sensed that despite appearances he was not alone. And the voices in his mind, the voices that had remained but steady murmurs while he had been among the other dragons, suddenly rose in a frenzy of excitement.
Soon, the world will be set to right. All those who have betrayed you will know their place. Order will be restored. You will take your rightful role.
This and more they repeated over and over to the Earth Warder. His chest swelled with pride and his eyes glittered with anticipation. Soon his world would be as he desired it.
"They have all given of themselves," he told the empty air. "Even absent knows Dormu."
The voices did not reply, but the dragon seemed to accept that they were pleased. He nodded to himself, then closed his eyes and concentrated, and at his summoning the dragon soul materialized.
Behold its beauty,
He rumbled as it floated level with his admiring gaze.
behold its perfection, its power.
The golden aura surrounded his creation, glowing with an intensity never before achieved. As Neltharion fixed his will upon it, the dragon soul began to quietly vibrate. Throughout the chamber, the stalactites and stalagmites began to shake as if stirring to life. The disk's vibration increased with each eager breath by the earth warder. The entire chamber now trembled. Fragments of rock broke free from the ceiling, and several huge stalactites quivered ominously.
Yes,
The dragon hissed eagerly. Neltharion's eyes burned with anticipation.
yes.
Now the very mountain rumbled as if some huge volcanic eruption or great tremor took place. The ceiling began to break in earnest. Huge stones dropped everywhere, striking the floor with ear-shattering booms. Many bounded off the massive dragon's hard hide, but he cared none at all. Then from the dragon's soul, ethereal shapes arose. They were shadows of light, vague images that darted around. Most had wings, and their outlines were akin to that of Neltharion. Some were black, some bronze, others blue or red. They began to swarm above the disk, rapidly growing in number. There were other shapes as well, smaller but more grotesque ones. They glowed a sickly green, and many had horns and deep pits for eyes. Their numbers were far smaller, but there was an intensity and evil that made them as arresting as the intermingling ghosts above them. They were the essences of all those who had contributed to the dragon soul's creation willingly or not. Tied to the disk, they represented together power that dwarfed even that of an aspect such as Neltharion. Their simple appearance was enough to cause cracks and fissures in the solid mountain, as the entire region now shook with vehemence. A gargantuan stalactite suddenly broke free. Caught up in his reverie, the Earth Warder did not notice it until it was too late. Only a formation of this magnitude could have injured the black dragon. It struck Neltharion on the left side of his jaw, ripping away even the hard-scaled flesh. One piece of bloody scale went flying, its hard edge hitting the dragon soul at the center. Uh-oh. This is where I think he's going to start to become Deathwing and why he needs that metal jaw. Neltharion roared with horror, not for himself, but rather at what had happened to his precious creation. The scale gouged the disk deep, ruining its perfection. The shapes above and below spun in an uncontrolled frenzy. The dragon acted quickly, ending the spell. The ghostly figures sank back into the disk, but slower, more hesitantly than he desired. As they vanished, the tremors ceased, leaving only drifting dust to mark its brief but terrible passage. When it was safe to do so, Neltharion seized the dragon soul and held it close. The gouge was not as deep as he had thought, but that it existed at all nearly threw him into a new fit. He had not expecting anything, much less himself, to be a danger to the disk.
You will be healed,
he whispered, cradling the tiny piece in his paw, as a mother might cradle her child in her arms.
You will be my perfection again.
Clutching the disk tightly, he departed the chamber as quickly as he could on 3 limbs, heading back up in a swift half-hopping motion. Neltharion radiated a pensiveness that would have unnerved even his consorts. The Earth Warder's breathing turned ragged as if he feared that all he had wrought would now be for nothing. Rather than return to where his own kind dwelled, however, the dragon veered to another series of tunnels. The hammering echoed louder as Neltharion moved his tremendous bulk through the narrow corridors, soon becoming distinct sounds of hard work. Peculiar voices chittered away, but their exact words were drowned out by the hammers. Neltharion thrust himself into the new chamber. The fiery illumination forced him to let his eyes adjust for a moment. When they had, they revealed scores of tiny limber goblins, busy in various stages of metalwork. This is the first we've heard of the goblin race. There were huge ovens everywhere, all fueled by the raging molten earth far below. Half a dozen of the green-skinned creatures struggled to remove from one huge casing what seemed an oval shield fit for a giant. The metal inside blazed a bright orange. The goblins quickly turned the casing over, letting its contents drop into a vat of water. Steam rose in a tremendous burst, nearly boiling one slow worker. Yeah, so this untied in any part of the other lore, no mention of goblins or their origin or anything has ever been mentioned. They would seem to be tied to orcs, but also kind of trolls. So now this book is just taking for granted they exist. So either this dude hasn't done his homework, or because it's a different author, yeah, like he's just taking it for granted. So I wonder if this is like asynchronous right here, and there shouldn't be. Other goblins hammered away at various pieces. A few wearing smocks wandered among the rest, making certain that everyone did his task properly. Not finding what he searched for around the chamber, Neltharion roared,
Meklo! Meklo, attend me!
The Leviathan's cry overwhelmed all other sounds. Startled, the goblins halted in their work. Two almost poured molten iron on a comrade.
To work! To work!
Snapped a high-pitched, irritated voice.
Want to ruin all!
The laborers immediately obeyed. From a walkway above, a spindly goblin of elder years with a tuft of gray fur atop his otherwise bald head scampered down to the impatient dragon. The chief goblin muttered to himself all the way, but his words held no anger against his master. Instead, he appeared to be constantly calculating things.
Density of 8 inches with a surface area of 120 square feet, which means approximately adding 42 more pounds to the mix, and
his foot bounced against the center toe of the remaining forepaw. The goblin glanced up, acting almost surprised to see the Leviathan.
My lord Neltharion, Meklo, see this?
The Earth Warder brought his huge paw close so that the goblin could study the disc. Meklo squinted, making a tisking sound.
Such craft work and no mod. The design was flawless. A scale of mine fell upon it, goblin. Explain why that should damage the invulnerable. Blood, too, I see.
Meklo looked up, surveying Neltharion's injury for a moment before tisking again.
Of course, this makes perfect sense. My lord Neltharion, you were integral in the formation of the disc itself, yes? You were there, goblin. You know. Yes, you created the matrix of its construction.
The head goblin thought a moment more, then asked.
The others, they've given their essences. They're tied into the disc matrix. Of course. Ah, but you are not. You created the dragon soul matrix, formed it with your power and blood, but you were the only dragon not directly bound to it.
The goblin grinned, showing pointed yellow teeth.
That makes you its only weakness, my lord. The scale, your blood, any part of you has the capability of destroying the dragon soul. You could crush the disc with ease, I imagine.
Meklo made a squashing gesture with his index finger and thumb. The Earthwarder's eyes grew monstrous to behold, even for the goblin.
I would never do such a thing. Of course not, babbled Meklo, groveling for Neltharion. Which means that nothing can ever destroy it, eh?
The fury smoldering within the dragon lessened. Neltharion's lips stretched back, revealing teeth larger than the goblin.
Yes, nothing. So my dragon soul is invulnerable. So long as you take no part in its destruction, the spindly figure dared remind him. Which shall never happen.
Neltharion gazed down at the damage wrought on the dragon soul.
But this must be repaired. The disc must be perfect again. It will require what it did last time.
The dragon scoffed.
You will have all of my blood that you need. It will be made. It will be whole. Naturally.
Meklo peered back at the other goblins.
It was slow completion of the other plans. We need your blood magic for those as well. All else can wait. The disc cannot. Then we shall begin now, my lord. Permit me a moment to shut down work. I will return with the necessary assistance then.
As the goblin retreated, Neltharion breathed easier. His precious creation would be healed. Like him, it would be perfect once more. And together, they would rule all. Alright, so, yeah, that's all going crazy. I'm a little bit off on the timeline of that. He doesn't become Deathwing until Cataclysm, which is a significant amount of time, at least maybe a decade or so after the World of Warcraft begins, which is a decent amount of time. I mean, we're talking probably at least a good 100 years or so from the opening of the Dark Portal, and we are 1,000 years before that happens, or 10,000 years? I think 10,000? So, somehow, It takes a 10,000 year span, but in that time, like the orcs do at year zero, so in 10,000 years, the dragonflights are corrupted. At least the red dragonflight fully. They're enslaved. Malagos, I'm not sure when he becomes crazed. I know that in Wrath of the Lich King, that's part of a thing. I think the green dragonflight gets stuck in the Emerald Dream. Those Dormus are always weird, flitting throughout time. So, then the black dragonflight, they're going to be evil pretty much for all time. So when does that happen? When does that start happening? I think that's. I wonder what's going to kind of make that not go away, but be dormant. Also, I don't remember, even though I think we read it in Chronicles, what role that plays in everything, the Well of Eternity happening. This goblin thing, I think, is a big deal because we have literally no idea where goblins come from. The trolls, they existed for a long time. I guess we don't really know. They just sort of talk about how they evolved and came up. I guess that's the difference between the horde side because, well, no, because you have the dwarves are curse of flesh coming from the keepers. The gnomes are curse of flesh coming from the mechagnomes, the keepers. The humans are curse of flesh coming from the Stormborn, Valkyr, whatever, coming from the keepers. Worgen come from humans. The Draenei come from outer space. What am I missing? Dwarves, gnomes, humans. The night elves come from the trolls. Now, from the orc side, we know the orcs come from the other planet like the Draenei do. The blood elves come from this situation. They're a spawn. The undead come much later. They come from humans. The Tauren have already evolved. We know that they have evolved from the Yongle. And that leaves the goblins. So we don't really know where they're coming from. But they are kind of troll-like, so I guess they could have evolved just in the same way that the trolls did, because the trolls are not one of the keepers. They're just natural evolution. In a way, they're like the true people of the land. Kind of like trolls best because of that. They're one of my favorite races. All right, guys. Another episode in the pipes 5x5. I thank you for listening and listening to my musings and my ponderings and my thoughts. See you on the next episode of Lore and Warcraft. Lore of Warcraft.